Welcome to Startup Climb, where we bring you interviews with startup founders. Through this podcast, we hope to go behind the curtains to find out where it all begins. This is an inside look on their journey, their struggles, and how they overcome adversity. On today's podcast, we have Felix Tan, the CEO and founder of Skilio. Skilio is an education technology startup that aims to measure and track soft skills development. Welcome, Felix. Hi, Felix.
Hi, Yuan.
Okay, so for listeners that might not know of Skilio, could you share a little bit about your company and the team?
Right. So Skilio is actually an education technology startup based in Singapore. We have developed an AI platform to actually track and measure soft skills development in students, especially in the non-academic activities that they do. Right. So this could range from the group projects that they are participating in, or the overseas volunteering activities that they are doing. Right. So we basically use self-reflection and 360 feedback from peers and from mentors or teachers, right, to basically understand students' soft skills development in these activities that they do. Right. So the vision for it is really to give students an ability, right, to tell employers or tell their future school about all of these non-academic activities that they have done, and also to present themselves as a holistic individual.
Right. So can I get a little bit of a sense of like how big the team is at the moment, etc.?
Right. So interestingly, we have three. The founding team is three of us. So I'm the CEO, and I have a CTO as well as a COO. Right. So all three of us are students actually. We are my co-founder from COO is actually from NUS psychology, and my CTO is from SUTD doing computer science. Right. So right now in the summer we actually have another 17 interns. They are working with us during the summer period to accelerate our product development process.
Right. So how did you guys meet, like you and your co-founder, since you are all students?
Yeah, so I started this as a solo founder. So I started this probably in June 2018. So at that point in time, it was still an idea. So I was like basically just going around and asking people and validating whether this idea or this problem that I'm solving is a big enough problem. And I basically met my CTO, Dodi, first. I was actually doing some training and facilitation work with Reactor School, right? And he was actually one of my facilitator where I was a trainer, right? So when I was speaking to him offsite, I found out, that he was at that point in time, he was also a JC student, and he was teaching himself programming. Right, so when he should be focusing on his A levels, right? So I basically found that he had a strong passion for education, and his ability to basically challenge status quo and not study for A levels, but do something more interesting, right, was something that I thought that I want to bring onto my team. On the other hand, also my COO, I met her actually in an orientation camp in NUS, right? So we were all from arts and social science. So she was in my orientation group. So at that point in time when I was speaking to her, she was already also a trainer that worked with youth. So she actually worked in the Strengths Finder kind of area. So it's a psychometric tool, and she is studying psychology lah. Yeah, so I instantly saw that match, because she herself has been spending her 2 years of her life, giving back to youth through Strengths Finder, right? And also because of her expertise in psychology, that is why I felt it was a good fit for the founding team.
Right, that's so interesting. So actually, like you met them a little bit like purely based on chance, because like just so nice, like the right place, right time, right person kind of thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, a lot of this, at that point in time, I would say that I was actively looking for a co-founder, because I realized I cannot do it alone. But I think to me at that point in time, looking for a co-founder, I was very particular in getting people that are very strong in the vision, right, and passionate in the education space. So I was very careful as well, and I think I was just very lucky that I was at the right place at the right time, to basically meet these two individuals, right, that eventually bring them on as a co-founder.
Right, so I'd like to circle back a little bit onto what Skilio does. So like we were talking about soft skill development, right? A question that I have is vis-a-vis like hard skills or like academics where there's an actual like yardstick. For example, if you take an exam, it's pretty much fair where everyone takes the same exam paper and the results that come out tend to be viewed as indicative of your performance of that particular subject or that particular field. But soft skills tend to be very subjective, right? Like, for example, feedback is quite subjective. So how do you like juggle that?
Right. So I totally agree with you, right? That hard skills is something that is easier to measure, right? It's easier to put a benchmark or standard to it, right? And when we talk about soft skills, it is harder because it's very intangible and subjective, like what you said, right? But I think we have to reframe and think about this in another perspective, right? The reason why we are using benchmark for hard skills is that we are comparing people against people. So we are comparing person A and person B in terms of maybe this hard skill or this academic outcome, right? But when we look at soft skills, right, it shouldn't be the case where we are comparing person A from person B, but we should be looking at person A past self and person A's future self, right, or present self. Right, so it is more of an individual journey. It is more of a personal development pathway rather than a way for us to compare, whether person A is a good leader or person B is a good leader. Right. So when we take that lens of basically looking at growth mindset, looking at helping an individual become a better version of themselves, right? Then we are able to basically put down a better yardstick to measure whether have these behaviors, in a particular soft skills practice over time, right? And then that, I guess, will give a more holistic view of soft skills measurement rather than looking at trying to compare everybody because everybody's unique, right? The way someone leads is very different from another person, right? So I think that is that mindset shift we need to have when it comes down to measuring soft skills.
Right. So I think that's very interesting, the way that you envision it to be, because I think what I initially had in mind was that this soft skills measurement could be used by an employer to actually sieve out candidates, because I think nowadays, especially with like the constantly changing times and technology, it's very hard to keep up with hard skills because hard skills are always changing, right? What you need now and what you need 5 years later might be completely different. But the soft skills part tend to generally be relatively similar. Like if you have good communication skills, it can carry you through multiple technological trends and hard skills changes. So I thought it could be used was as a yardstick for employers to find candidates, right? To find so, but from what you mentioned, it sounds more like a personal development journey.
Yeah, so I think according to that, right, I think that in terms of comparing individual to individual, right, we want to look at a longer time span, right? It's probably very unfair for us to say, like for maybe a HR manager to say that I'm going to look at the students' soft skills development over the past 3 months, right? That would not be as accurate if I were to extrapolate the data and look at it across 6 years or maybe 3 years, right? And that is why I emphasize on having that personal development mindset, right? To develop soft skills over time. Then after maybe after the users have used it for maybe close to 1 year, 2 years, right? Then that data is better or more accurate to do a comparative analysis across the different individual, right? And I think it is also not right to say that for HR managers to pick out someone who has the best leadership. And that doesn't mean that person A who have maybe, for example, better leadership, right, does not, and person B who doesn't, right, and person B is lousier. No, right? It really because of how unique soft skills is, right? How different leadership styles can emerge from the way you practice it, right? A lot of it falls in terms of the company's culture, right? So maybe for, let's say, for a particular company like Facebook, right? So maybe they value a lot about, moving fast, right? And breaking things. So they want people who are risk takers, for example, right? So this risk taking is one of a behavior under, a certain soft skills, right? So if you're able to then find candidates that have exhibited risk taking across, 1 or 2 years of their life using the Skilio platform, right? Then we're able to better find that fit or find that match to a company's culture. So I would say that in terms of comparing between candidates, right, in terms of soft skills, we also have to be very careful in terms of looking at the more intricate behaviors that the companies are looking out for in terms of their culture, as well as the students, how often have the students displayed this over time.
Right. So on that point, right, of culture, I would like to discuss a little bit more about it. So different companies have different culture. I think you did mention earlier that how a candidate fits depends a lot on the company's culture.
Yeah.
So how far do you think, how big of a part do you think a company's culture play in the development and the nurturing of a person's soft skills?
Right. So I think it is becoming a bigger trend in nowadays, especially as the millennials and the Gen Z start to go into the workforce. Because right now, they are saying that a lot of young people, they are looking to work for a purpose, right? They are looking to have meaningful work. Right. And a lot of times this can only be manifested if a company has strong culture. Right. And I would say that this culture eventually boils down into the values of the company. And when we look at values of the company, right, those are the things that the company focus on and say that, for example, I want you to always challenge the status quo. Right. So in a lot of these activities and behaviors that take place within the company setting, right, they would try to encourage their employees to exhibit this behavior or exhibit this value, right, of challenging the status quo. So I think there is this very interesting company started by Ray Dalio, right? So they actually have a set of principles that is being carried out in his company. So they are very particular about having equal opinion. So and a junior ranking employee can basically tell off a senior ranking employee just because he or she has data to basically validate his own opinion. Right. So I think that in itself is a manifestation of values and culture that is built into the company. And right. And if carried out properly, that is a way for them, for these employees to actually develop soft skills while they are working with these companies.
Right. Okay. I think I get it on that part. So actually, I feel like from what you mentioned, that company's culture do play like quite a big part in shaping a person's values and skills as well. But I would like to bring it a little bit back onto the edtech industry. I think you mentioned that Skilio is a edtech space.
Yep.
Could you describe how you view the sector?
Okay. I would say that we are seeing more and more companies going into the education technology space, and that is because I think at least in the whole landscape of education, it is ripe for disruption, right? If we were to look across time, right now, if you were to look across the whole world, education is still pretty much industrialization kind of format, right? Where we house people in classrooms and of 40 people in one classroom, and then when the school bells ring, it's just like in a factory where the factory bell ring, and then you go for lunch and things like that, right? So it is still very our education system are still very designed in the industrialization kind of period, right? So I think more and more startups are actually coming into this place trying to disrupt the status quo in the education system. I think when we look at this COVID situation, right, it is a clear example of how education technology can actually value add, right, to learning, right, and actually change the way we learn, especially in this current climate, right. And I think this will only become this trend will only become even more stronger going down the road. Because of how this pandemic has shaped the way we live and the way we learn.
Right. So do you feel that as a founder yourself, because just now we mentioned a little bit about a company's culture, that you are often self-reflective because of all the nature of your product and your company is that you want to develop soft skills. That do you look inwards into your company that, hey, I want to help my interns develop their soft skills as well? And how do you go about doing it?
Yeah, definitely, man. I think I'm very strong on making sure that everyone in the company learn not just from themselves, but as well as from others as well, right? So, like personally for me, I keep a journal that I actually write every week about my highs and lows of the week, right? And then basically I rate my week out of 10, right? And interestingly enough, for the past 2 years that I've been doing it, if I were to plot it on a graph, right, it is exactly like a roller coaster, right? Ups and downs every other week, right? And so also for my interns, right, I make sure that they have the opportunities to learn not just within their own job function. So I encourage someone who is doing marketing to basically try to learn a bit of coding, right? And basically, I will also bring my tech intern to basically meet my clients or meet investors, right? Because I think that especially in the future of work, right? We shouldn't be a specialist, right? We should be a generalist, and then being able to be adaptive and nimble enough to go specialize into the areas that requires for our skill sets, right? And that is some practices that we at Skilio that we actually implement to make sure that our interns actually learn from one another, and as well as reflect about how they can do better, right? And I think the other thing is that we ensure that we give our interns the opportunities to go and try and to fail. I think that is the beauty of working in a startup, right? Because everything is so fluid and flexible. And on our end, as a founding team, we actually allow our interns to do whatever they want, as long as it still ties in with the overall vision or the direction that the department or the company is moving towards. So one example that I can give is that in our marketing team, one of our interns actually came out with this Skilio seedling campaign, right? So it's basically a campaign that documents the insider story of Skilio. So basically they did like a behind the scenes of how all the interns and the founders actually worked during this period of time working from home. So this was an idea that was proposed by the interns herself, right? And we were like, okay, just go ahead and do it, right? And then you tell us what is the KPI that you're measuring against, right? And if you are able to hit it, then good. If you're not, then how are you going to improve it? How are you going to iterate it? Or how are you going to change it, right? So I think that those are the small little things or small little policies that we have within the company to try to ensure that our interns also have a fair opportunity to learn and to grow.
Right. So I think it really sounds like that you are constantly on this whole goal of trying to develop people, and I think that your platform is basically trying to amplify the outreach that you have to help people develop their soft skills. When it comes to founders, let's talk about startup founders, right? What is the most important soft skill in your opinion that founders should have?
Well, there's too many. Okay, I would say adaptability. I think that would be one of the many soft skills that come out tops, I would say, because I guess especially if we're starting a startup as founders, there is just too many variables at one go that we have to go through or deal with, right? And a lot of times as founders, we wear multiple hats, and it is very easy for us to basically I'm not a coder and I'm not going to code, right? But if you are a founder, you have no choice, right? You have to at least learn a little bit so that you can get it started or get it off somewhere until a point where you're able to get someone on board to help with the tech component, right? So I think having that the adaptability to be able to wear multiple hats, to be able to go through different challenges or different setbacks, allow us to basically go through that first phase, right, of trying to figure out whether there's product market fit. And once that is passed, then a different set of challenges will arrive, right? So when I actually look back at my own startup journey, I could distinctively tell that there are different phases in this whole startup journey, right? The very first phase is to make sure that the problem exists, right? And at that point in time, the kind of skill sets required is very different. And moving past the problem phase is to come up with a solution and making sure the solution works, right? And then that's another phase, and that requires a different set of skills as well. And then moving forward, like fundraising, right? Fundraising is another phase of a startup journey, and the skill sets required then is also very different. So I think having the adaptability to be able to go through these different phases and grow along with your startup, I think that is something, in my opinion, right, is a very crucial soft skills for founders.
Just curious, is there a difference between adaptability and resilience?
Well, I would say that there are some differences. Resilience would be looking at tough times and how do you bounce back when you are actually when you are met with failure or met with setback, right? And basically that is the layman definition of resilience, right? I think being adaptable doesn't mean that you will face with setback, but it means that being able to recognize threats or recognize opportunities, right, and then basically try to move fast enough to capture those opportunities or to avert those crises, right? So I think there is a subtle and difference between these two, but I would still say that both of them are actually equally important for a founder.
Right. So I think since you're on the topic of adaptability, right, and we sort of like came into a consensus that adaptability is a very, very important skill. How would a founder then, or like how would anyone then develop it?
Well, okay, for any soft skills, if we think about it, we can distill them into behaviors, right? So if I were to use an example of like, say, public speaking, right? Like communication, right? In order to be a good, effective public communicator, right? You need to be, maybe, for example, you need to prepare your script beforehand, right? You need to, when you're delivering the speech, you need to make sure your shoulders width apart, you're looking at your audience, having eye contact, right? So all of those things are behaviors that make up a good, effective communicator, right? So when we look at adaptability, right, I think if we were to distill it down into behaviors, right, I would say that is to have an open mind, right, to be open-minded about different things that could come your way, right? So this might be in the form of rejections from your customers. This might be in the form of your VCs not giving you the investment deal that you are looking for, and then also being open-minded enough to new opportunities or different ways of doing things, right? So in that case, it helps to build up towards adaptability, for example, right? And so I would say that there are different behaviors that make up adaptability, and off the head of my mind right now, I think one of them would be being open-minded about things that comes your way, and basically leverage on those opportunities or crises to basically try to make a difference.
Right. Does that also mean that that I cannot artificially like accelerate my growth when it comes to, let's say, I want to be a bit more adaptable, that everything has to be very organic? Because the examples that you came up with sounds very organic. Like, for example, investor meetings and setbacks. These are not something that generally can be artificially created. So does this mean that soft skills development is a very organic process where we just have to give it time, and as we age and gain experience, we sort of develop it along the way?
Right. I would say that you can be more, I would say, active towards it rather than passive, right? So I think the first step to develop any soft skills is self-awareness, right? If you're self-aware about some of the areas that you're good in, some of the areas that you're not so good in, right? This allow you to basically put more effort or more concentration to actually improve those areas. So if we look at, say, adaptability, right? If I am I want to maybe develop adaptability, right? So I might possibly, ask for 100 feedback from my customers, right? I intentionally do that, right? But if I'm not that passive, maybe if I'm passive and I want to just let it come and basically learn adaptability on the go, right? And then that maybe will result in the case whereby I let the environment or the situation around me dictates the way I learn soft skills, right? But you can also take an active approach to do that by doing certain actions or certain steps to basically expose yourself to that behavior. So for example, about open-mindedness, right? So that could come in the form of you going out and deliberately asking for feedback and facing rejection, right? And then that maybe can help you look at things differently, right? And that is basically out of your own will, out of your own actions. So I would say that it does not have to really come from the environment or the things that you are the situation around you. You can also take an active step to developing your own soft skills.
I see. I'd like to hit a little bit back towards student entrepreneurship, because I understand that you are currently still a student.
Yeah.
Do you feel that being a student and an entrepreneur at the same time gives you an advantage?
Well, I would say that it varies. I would say, like for different situation. So, like
Right.
for me, as I am working in an edutech space, so being a student is like definitely an advantage, right? Because I'm very close to my users, and I could really iterate and work on the product quickly because I could get instant feedback. And being in a school setting means that I could basically test out my product, very quickly and get feedback from teachers, get feedback from the administrator, and for the students themselves, right? But
Right.
being a student might also disadvantage you, right? Because maybe investors, right, or clients, right, they might not think that you are serious, right? They might think that you are just play and things like that. So
Right.
they might not give you that kind of treat you seriously, right? And that in itself might actually downplay your credibility when you're speaking to maybe VCs, or you're speaking to clients that you want to sell a product to. Yeah, so I would say that there are advantages and there are disadvantages as well to being a student and an entrepreneur.
Right. But do you feel like being a student gives you more opportunities in the, like, let's say when we talk about hackathons or like
Mm.
competitions, how important do you feel that these competitions or like hackathons are in the development of a startup, or like how helpful do you feel that it will be?
Well, I would say really it depends on what's the purpose of you joining the hackathon,
Right.
right? I think there are a lot of people that go in just wanting to maybe have an experience, just wanting to perhaps uh, uh, use that to build on their portfolio or resume, right?
Right.
And there are people that already have an idea, and they already want to start a business, and then they go in to get validation, right? So it really depends on what's the intention or the purpose that you're going into this hackathon for, right? And for founders or student founders that are really hell bent, right, on starting a company or have an idea or a problem that they want to solve, going through a hackathon actually can help accelerate that whole process, because you're actually put in this pressure cooker environment to maybe create a prototype, or pitch in front of get feedback from mentors or industry experts, right? And this could help iterate and sharpen your ideas once you finish with hackathon. Right. So I would say that, hackathons and competitions are great, right? But it really depends on what's the intention going into these hackathons. And if you have the right intention going into it, then as a student founder, that would probably be a very advantageous position, because you gain a lot from this short exposure to these competitions.
Right. Do you feel that people are more willing to share with you or to offer you advice? I think just now you did mention a little bit about mentorship because you are a student.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, okay, that will probably also be one of my advantages as being a student entrepreneur. You basically get advice from like C-suites, from those high-ranking
Right.
people, high-profile people, right, for free, right? Because usually as a student, as long as you're willing to ask, as long as you are willing to reach out, right, a lot of them are willing to spend an hour or two to basically sit you down and talk through your business, or mentor you on certain areas. I myself have actually a lot of mentors from different aspects of my business, or it could be also be my personal life. So I would say that being a student gives you that give you that ability to be more thick skin, right? To basically ask advice and feedback from those that have went through it before, and are able to give you advice and feedback.
Right. Would you advise people to go into it as a student?
Yeah, totally, man. I think this is the best time as a student, right? This is the best time to gain practical experience, to really have an understanding of what's the working world like. When I started Skilio, I was in year one NUS, right? So like I learned so much. I would always tell my friend, right, that I learned so much more starting a startup than being in a classroom, right? Because like I think like what you shared earlier, I was doing an arts degree, right? And being in Skilio and being forced to start Skilio, right? I basically learned business concepts, right? How do I do an accounts, right? How do I draft a contract, right? And all of these things are not things that I will be taught, in my module, right? And whether or not you succeed at the end of 4 years, or maybe your startup fail while you're still studying, it doesn't matter, right? Because at the end of the day, you didn't lose anything, right? Maybe you lose some sleep, right? Maybe you lose a few friends because you maybe don't hang out with them that often anymore, right? But you gain a lot in terms of practical experiences related to work, right? And network as well, because you will meet with a lot of mentors, you'll meet with a lot of industry experts, and who knows, if your startup doesn't work out, one of these mentors could offer you a job at their company, right? And I guess this is something that I think all students, right, should bear in mind. And if they do have the capacity to really think about starting a startup, I think that will, especially while they're studying, I think that will definitely help and value add to their growth and their learning as well.
Right. I think we mentioned a little bit about setbacks earlier and how it actually helped develop soft skills. So what was your biggest struggle thus far while you were running Skilio, and how do you overcome it?
Right. So I think the biggest setback, I would say, or the challenge that we had was that how do we tell people that we have a credible way of measuring soft skills, right? Because I think the status quo is that no, I don't think you are not able to measure soft skills because it's very intangible, it's very subjective, everybody thinks of it differently, right? And that was the biggest hurdle that we have in terms of trying to convince schools, trying to convince students, right, that this platform and this methodology that we are adopting actually works, right? So how we actually overcome it was, I wouldn't say that we completely overcome it, but it is a slow and gradual process, right? So we actually, initially we basically take research papers, right, and use that as a basis of our research, right? And those things basically give us credibility when we pitch to maybe a school, right? They would always ask, right, so how do you justify the methodology that you have? And being able to then pull out a few of these research papers that are done by experts in psychology and things like that, that helps to add our boost to the credibility that we have, right? And so of course, after that, when we build our own algorithm and things like that, we also do a lot of testing, right? So where we actually created a set of like data that was run by the AI, and we also physically manually do the AI ourselves, be the AI, right, and then compare the two results, right, to see how far away are the results from the AI as well as from the human ratings, right? So those are the different small little things that we do to basically try to add value to the credibility, because that is something that's very, very important, especially in the education space that we are in. Yeah, so I would say that it's a gradual process, and we are still in the midst of overcoming it, right? So one of the recent, I would say, challenges in terms of these aspects would be that we are still, after all, still a student startup, right? And like when we are talking to maybe big schools, right, like NTU, and SMU, that kind of big institutions, right, they would often doubt, are you going to continue doing this after graduation, right? If they were to pen a contract that is like 2 years, what if we don't do it after 1 year, or we think that this is something that is just a playtime thing, right? So I think this kind of different this kind of challenges do pop up along this aspect of credibility, along this aspect of how can we make sure that you guys are what you say you are.
Right. But do you feel like I think you did mention about it being recent. Do you feel that the recent virus situation, the COVID situation, actually helped boost a little bit of like the credibility of Skilio, because a lot of people are more interested in self-improvement during such times where they are unable to go out, so they are very like, hey, now is the time for me to upgrade myself. Do you feel that it actually helped Skilio better pitch to schools, etc., because now everyone is so focused on soft skill development or like just upgrading themselves?
Yeah, I would say that during this period, we actually have an increased demand, I would say, or interest from a lot of different from schools, right? Because I think one thing is that students are starting to recognize that just purely getting a degree or having a diploma or something like that is not enough for them in the workforce, right? Especially with COVID and how the economy is doing, and people are laying off workers and things like that. And like what you said, right? There is a sudden look towards how can we develop students in other aspects, right? That will help them to be more resilient, or to be more adaptable in the future workforce, right? And we are, like, I would say that getting like more inquiries on how we do that, and like just this week alone we have been doing a lot of demos to schools and things like that to basically try to let them understand about what we do. Yeah, so I would say that this period of time has increased, or I would say boosted the kind of interest that we have, and we are working on our very best to basically try to add value to the students as well as the schools as well.
Right, for sure. So I think it's great that like you all are doing well now, because I think previously there might have been a difficult paradigm shift to get people to actually focus onto soft skills. So I think because of this whole pandemic thing, it might ease the transition and help you guys get more eyeballs on your product.
Yeah.
But was there anything that you have done differently? If let's say from now, like you look back on hindsight, what would you have done? Is there anything that you have done differently when starting Skilio?
Yeah, many things I would have done differently.
Right.
Yeah. So okay. One of the very first mistake that we had, right, was that we were very excited about our idea. So we went on and straight away start building a mobile application, right? And when we started to talk to schools in Singapore, we realized that they don't allow the students to use their mobile phone in class, right? So that was a huge slap in our face, right? And say that, you should have talked to the customer more. You should have find out what they need, right? And we basically spent close to 3 months trying to build that mobile app. And once we had that kind of feedback from the customers, we had to basically script the whole mobile project and develop a web-based version of it, right? So I think that was one of the thing. If I could redo, right, I would have listened to the customer more. I would have, not be so quick to build a product, right, but to test it a little bit more and maybe build a quick MVP to test it out before I actually really start, putting in the resources to code everything out. Yeah, so I think that was one of the highlight. I would say that, when I look back, that would be something that I would definitely not have done, because that would have cut down our lead time, our development time by 3 months.
Right. Wow. Okay, that sounds like a lesson that I feel like a lot of founders should take note of, in the sense that like sometimes maybe before we even start building the product, maybe we should talk to some customer first or target market first, in order to understand if there are certain features that are actually in demand, or is it just something that we thought is a good idea at that point of time.
Definitely.
Right. So let's go on to the other side of the coin, right? What was the greatest achievement thus far in Skilio that you feel that, hey, I'm very proud of this and I'm so glad that I did it?
Right. So I would say that when we secure our first paying client, right, that was, I think, the momentous time in accomplishment, like in our whole journey so far. Because I remember at that point in time, so we basically, like I said, we script the mobile project, right, and we were still developing the web version. So we actually, when we were starting to plan for the web version, we actually went to build an MVP first, right? So we actually used like Google Sheets, and the AI basically was us at the back end doing all the physical matching, and like we basically put out like a Google site to be a front, and we actually sold that to our first client, right? And they were okay with it being an MVP, and we were pretty excited and happy that that was like a first validation that what we are building actually is solving a problem, because they are willing to pay to solve that problem that they face, right? So I think that was one of the biggest accomplishment thus far, and I could always remember the first sale that we made with what we actually have at that point in time. So that actually gives us that reminder, right? Especially right now as we are developing the software, right? To always check in with the customer, to always make sure that we do not jump the gun and create features that people don't want, right? To always make sure that we have data to validate why we are building these things. Yeah, so I would say that would be one of our biggest accomplishments thus far.
Right. So actually, from what I'm hearing from you, right, your biggest change that you made and the lesson that you learned out of it turned out to lead to your biggest accomplishment.
Yeah, it sounds like that.
So would you say that, yeah, it's sort of like a journey kind of thing?
It is definitely a journey. I would say that. I think when we actually made that first mistake, I'm glad that as a team we reflected and decided that moving forward we need to be a bit more careful. We need to adopt a different approach or different methods to actually towards product development. And I guess that helped in a sense because we were very skeptical, right, whether we can sell an MVP. But we were like, okay, just go and try it, right? Just go and pitch to a few customers and see whether this is something that we can sell them, right? And eventually we got it. We managed to get a deal, and that was, like I said, the biggest accomplishment that we had.
Right. So I would like to go a little bit into like the whole Skilio as a company, right? Are you guys looking to do any fundraising at the moment?
Yeah, we are actually looking to raise our pre-seed or either seed round at the end of this year or maybe early next year.
Right. So I think I would like to pick your brains on this a little bit, because a lot of founders, in my opinion, might not really know what to look for in an investor. So what is the greatest quality, if like you could pick one quality that you would look for in an investor?
I would say, like for me personally, it will be the alignment to the company's vision, right? Because I believe that onboarding any investors into your company is a long-term endeavor, right? It's like a marriage, right? So you want to make sure that the partner that you are bringing on, you are marrying to, right, is someone that believe in the same kind of vision that you have for your company, right, and will eventually challenge you to make sure that you reach those vision that you set for yourself. Right, and I think those are the qualities that you want to look for, especially if you are looking for an investor, especially if you are an early stage startup, because they will be there most of the time along this journey with you, right? So you want to make sure that you find someone who aligns with you in terms of the company's vision, aligns with you in terms of your own personal values as well.
Right. I'd like to wrap this interview up with just a final question, which is, what is one advice you'll give to an aspiring founder?
Yeah, I would say start with the problem, right? Start with the problem and validate and make sure that there is a problem to be solved, right? So a lot of times I think when we want to go into entrepreneurship or we want to start a business, we jump the gun and go straight to the idea, right? And a lot of times we don't spend time to understand the problem. And I would say that if we spend enough time to actually understand the problem, then the solution that we come up with may be more targeted at the problem and may help you to gain product market fit at a faster pace. Yeah, so I think for any aspiring founder, first is just do it, right? Just get yourself out there and start doing something, right? And the second would be to start focusing. When you're doing it, make sure you're focusing on the problem first before you come up with any ideas.
Right. Thank you so much for taking our time out from your schedule to actually talk to me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I think I learned a lot on the whole soft skill development in Singapore, and like especially like what you guys are doing. And I feel like there will be a paradigm shift like towards focus in soft skills. So I wish you all the best in your company's development, and I hope that you can continue sharing your aspirations and your goals to help more people develop their soft skills.
Yep, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey listeners, so that was the interview with Felix. After talking to him, I feel like I gained a better understanding of soft skill development. And in my opinion, I think that we need to have a change in narrative to have greater focus on soft skill development. This is as hard skills are ever changing with time, which means that what you need to know now might be very different from what you need to know 10 years later or what you needed to know 10 years ago. But soft skills like communication and leadership is constant. Even if you have a very good business idea, if you're unable to communicate the idea to investors or clients, you won't get the deal. Let me give you a personal example. For me, I want to become a better interviewer, to be able to have a conversation that is coherent and at the same time valuable to listeners. So what I've done is to start reading up on podcasting and interviewing. If you have any opinions or thoughts on this topic, I would love to hear from you. Just drop me a message on LinkedIn or email, and I'd love to have a conversation with you on this subject. We have come to the end of this episode. I hope that this has been an insightful learning experience for you. Do follow us on Spotify and Google Podcasts to catch future episodes. Till then, take care.